things have to be. Your mind is steady with resolve, and yet your hands are still shaking.
Trauma is a frequent and unavoidable occurrence in our world. When someone loses an important part of themselves, whether that be through the loss of some material thing, one's own innocence, or the loss of a loved one, there is a hole carved into their hearts. The impulsive reaction of many is to do everything they can to take back what they had lost. That might look like pursuing more material things to become drunk in, becoming obsessed with things from their past that reminds them of their innocence, forming as many new bonds as they can, or destruction. Everyone deals with pain in their own way. Some do good things to cope with it. Others do bad things. But regardless of if their intentions are good or bad, the one thing they have in common is that they are only putting a temporary bandage over their trauma. As they get older, they become more and more conditioned to cope in these unproductive ways. A good Samaritan is undoubtedly being productive for others, and acting kind is absolutely good for the soul, but even then, they are still not doing everything they need to be doing in order to experience proper closure. But before we can explore what it is someone in this situation must do, let's take a moment to talk about Kung Fu Panda. Po's journey is one of self-discovery and acceptance. In the first film, he discovers that, to be special, he doesn't have to be anything other than his regular old self. In the third, he finds fulfillment in accepting all aspects of himself: a friend, a teacher, and a son to two different fathers. But he could not have accepted what he had in the third film until he learned how to see within, deep within, where the pain lies. And that is how the story of Kung Fu Panda 2 comes in. Po, hilariously enough, spends his life in the valley, never questioning where he comes from, despite his dad being a goose. His life with Mr. Pang is just so normal and mundane to him that he simply accepts that he had always been Pang's son. But when visions of his past are triggered, he needs answers, the weight of which costs him in moments where he needs to stand strong. Ignorance has a way of numbing you to pain. Po's trauma of losing his parents had become so buried underneath the life he'd led that it never really bothered him because he didn't even know about it. But not everyone can go their whole lives ignorant to these things. Eventually, our past catches up to us, and while Po in this film spends his time chasing after the truth, Lord Shen had been going on for years, running away from it. Unlike Po, Shen had known the fate of his parents ever since they died. The heartbreak of seeing their son lose himself to darkness and then sending him away because of it had been so heavy a burden that it killed them. And maybe he would have felt a sense of guilt for what had happened to them, if only he ever allowed himself to process the reality that they were gone. But he didn't. He continued to pursue his path of greed and avarice because that was what he was good at. It was all he allowed himself to do. It was what distracted him from thinking about his parents. Shen had been wrestling with the truth for so long, but Po had only just learned there even was a truth to his past, something other than what he had already known. The weight of it all hit him over and over throughout the course of the film, sometimes literally in the form of Shen's cannons. He needed to know what had happened, and yet he also knew that deep down, the answers were always there. He was just too afraid to let them reveal themselves. Until finally, his decision not to let that pain flow exploded right in his face. Po is an example of how you don't have to be a bad person to lack inner peace. Even someone as heroic and wholesome as he is can have their demons, and make the unhealthy decision not to face them. Shen needed to accept his past in order to grow as a person and get over his unending thirst for conquest and dominion, but the same was necessary even for Po, who does not have such twisted desires, because his trauma was holding him back from being the warrior, the protector he needed to be for the ones he cared about. It's important for good people to face their darkness, just as it is for the evil. Poe and Shen were chasing the same thing whilst going in opposite directions, but what neither of them, except for eventually Poe, had seen was that the present was all that mattered. While it is important to face your demons and come to terms with past trauma, what are we supposed to do after that?
Mighty river release my soul. I need to see the world to the end. Now I go against my sorrow. Mighty river release my soul. I do the open road. I can stay here forever in this solo.
In Vinland Saga, the love young Thorfinn felt for his father Thor's was so prevalent that he never imagined he would ever lose him. For those who have grown up with loving parents, their presence is something the young see as a matter of fact. Of course Mom and Dad will always be around. They were there when I was born, and they will be with me forever. We'll always be together. But the reality is that nothing lasts forever. Even the most beautiful things die when there's no one left around to remember them. Thorfinn chose not to accept this. He chose not to think much about anything, only his hatred for Askeladd. He trudged blindly through a dark forest, chasing one thing with reckless abandon and a bottomless hatred, not paying any mind to the things around him, to the destruction he was leaving in his wake. While it might sound like he was chasing a future, or doing things in the present to distract himself, in actuality, he was just stuck in the past, trapped in an endless loop, repeating over and over that moment when Askeladd's men filled Thor's with arrows. And then it happened. The man Thorfinn had been chasing for all of those years, to justify running away from his pain, had disappeared. Now, he was alone in that dark forest, with nothing left to run towards, no light in the distance in which to reach for. He found that he never actually took a single step towards the future. He'd hardly been living in the present, and yet, he still chose not to face the darkness around him. He remained empty, ignoring the past, present, and future by giving himself up to be a slave and keeping his hands busy with work on Ketil's farm. In a striking parallel to Thorfinn, Canute had lost his own father figure, Ragnar. When coming to terms with Ragnar's death, he had discovered the beauty of true love in nature and death, and opened his eyes to a universal fact, but he was still blind. Canute only used this realization as an excuse to run away from the pain of losing Ragnar, denying reality as it was, and yearning for a brighter future, something other than the present. His obsession with taking the crown to create a perfect world led him down his own destructive path. Even those with the best intentions in their hearts would do good not to ignore their inner turmoil. While you go about your daily life pretending that nothing is wrong, all you're doing is letting the demons grow deep inside of you, developing a stronger taste for your fragile mind. Canute saw the utter selfishness in man, even in those who are loving and caring towards others, people who most would consider good. Even his own beloved Ragnar allowed for an entire village to be slaughtered so Canute could have food to survive on. He saw just how short-sighted the hearts and minds of men truly are. He could no longer accept this world. He needed to see it changed. Canute was not wrong in detesting this cruel world, but much like the dynamic between Lord Shen and Poe, Canute was obsessed with the future, and Thorfinn, during his time with Askeladd, was stuck in the past. Neither of them wanted to face the current moment. Just because you're doing things to keep yourself busy, that does not mean you're really living in the moment. Your pain might have come from the past, but it exists right now. Perhaps you've been chasing the future and telling yourself, when I achieve X, Y, and Z, I'll finally be happy. But that couldn't be further from the truth, and you know it. The time to take hold of your inner peace is now. But before he could do that, Thorfinn had to remember what it felt like to want to be alive. Around the time Thorfinn had met Einar, He had found himself in a state of emptiness where he did not fear death. He didn't exactly yearn for it, but he didn't enjoy living either. He was trapped in that state of emptiness where not a single thing meant anything to him. When he and Einar had worked together, seeing the fruits of their labor and forming a brotherly bond, something within Thorfinn was beginning to reawaken. But that does not mean he had been cleansed of his darkness. Far from it. When Thorfinn had harmed another person for the first time in years, he was reminded of the monster inside of himself that had lived and slaughtered on the battlefield, killing people who had no quarrel with him, and allowing the innocent to be raped and murdered while he turned a blind eye and focused only on his own selfish goals. He realized that just because he shut out his guilt, it had never gone away. He had never truly moved on from the man he had been. When the spirit of Askeladd tells Thorfinn to climb towards the goal of becoming a true warrior and to bring his victims with him, that is Thorfinn's first step towards finally moving on from his pain. Not to shut it out, not to be empty, but to accept himself, his reality, his suffering for what it is, and to move forward regardless of its weight. We've talked about what people might do to cope with their trauma, and that it takes making a decision to face it in order to move on. But we haven't yet delved too deeply into what it looks like to actually face the pain. For that, let's take a look at a manga series that transformed my life. Unlike young Thorfinn, who had ignored his inner self, Vagabond's Miyamoto Musashi had always been a deeply introspective man. He'd always looked inwards, studying himself and his place in the world. You might say that he hadn't so much been ignoring his fears, but rather he was so woefully aware of himself that he was drowning in them. And yet, he didn't truly know himself at all. Musashi was not looking within in a productive and healthy way. Rather, he was trapped in his own head, unsure of how to respond to his feelings, causing him to be a hateful and destructive person, not just towards the others he harmed, but to himself as well. The depths of one's own soul is where the answers lie. However, Musashi's problem was not that he was unaware of his inner turmoil. It was that he was blind to the world around him. The world as it is, not what he had perceived it to be. He lived a life of violence and bloodshed, striving to be the strongest man in the world, invincible under the very sun itself. And a great number of other men, the samurai and ronin, lived very similarly. Vagabond shows the vapidness of pursuing goals for the sake of it, especially ones that involve harming others. Speaking of vapidness, Honiden Matahachi is a man who did not look within himself at all. He was even further away from any self-improvement than his childhood friend Musashi. Matahachi knew he was a coward, a liar, a hedonist, but unlike Musashi, he wasn't taking that extra step to learn from his mistakes and evolve. He was a parasite, contributing nothing good to the world, but also, most of the time, not causing anyone any real harm. When presented with opportunities to do good, he was afraid to put himself out and prioritized his own safety. When he did something horrible, instead of trying to make amends, he ran away or made up excuses in an effort to get himself out of trouble, only to make the situation worse or eventually find himself in another predicament. Similar to Musashi, Matahachi was at war with himself, unwilling to fully accept his own shortcomings and that he was responsible for his mistakes. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls. a quote from real-life psychologist Carl Jung. Instead of seeing others as neighbors, people like Musashi feel threatened by a lot of people they come across, even those that mean them no harm. They are so tangled up in their own insecurities that they project their violent tendencies onto others. And that's what happens when you go your whole life living a lie, being detached from your real, natural self, and pursuing things that others tell you are important, or you deem important because they cover your insecurities like a frail bandage. Musashi's dialogue is quite childish early on in the story. He was always asking others, especially his opponents, whether or not he was strong. He was living in such a primal mindset that he was unable to act his age. He spoke to these men as if they were his father, perhaps trying to grasp for validation from them, which he never got from his father, who only ever scolded and feared him due to his own similar insecurities about wanting to believing that he was invincible. If one is unaware of why they are living the way they are, they will only ever feel malcontent deep down, and feel as if they aren't really achieving anything, even when doing things they enjoy. As I said, it wasn't that Musashi was ignorant to his turmoil, but he was blind as to how to properly deal with it. He thought that destroying every opponent in his way was the path to fulfillment. Preoccupied with a single leaf, you won't see the tree. Preoccupied with a single tree, you'll miss the entire forest. See everything in its entirety, effortlessly. That is what it means to truly see. Even when given guidance by wise men like Taquan, Musashi kept asking himself the wrong questions. What is distracting me? Why am I so weak? How do I defeat my opponents? The journey leading up to his battles felt good. That anticipation to fight and conquer strong warriors, and there is no feeling quite as exhilarating as being in the heat of battle. But when all was said and done, when he finally did best his opponents, when the adrenaline wore off, he found himself standing in the same place as always. The same endless pursuit of fulfillment, where he could see short-term goals just within his grasp, but when he finally took a hold of them, they did nothing except deepen the blackness around his disturbed soul. The same could be said for Matahachi when he pursued luxury in food, alcohol, and sex. None of it ever truly left him feeling satisfied, and that is one thing I love about Vagabond. It not only shows the crushing existentialism behind romanticizing and loving fights to the death, but it shows that it is no different than pursuing luxury, wealth, and comfy things. Matahachi was so concerned about getting himself out of situations he put himself in that he didn't have anything good to offer to anyone else. If you think only of yourself, life has no value. It wasn't that he was incapable of changing himself. I believe everyone has that ability, but some of us just never choose to learn from our mistakes and continue to keep making them, hoping for a different outcome without any effort on our part. Matahachi knew he was a loser, but he believed he was always trying his best. I'm not here to judge whether or not he was really trying or not, but what I can say is that he wasn't trying the right things. That was until his mother Osugi was dying. He vowed to make her final resting place be their home, Miyamoto Village. On the way there, he was crushed by the weight of all the lies and regrets he had built up over the years. He'd hit the bottom, feeling at the end of his rope, to the point that he attempted to jump off a cliff to end his and his mother's suffering, but he couldn't do it. Finally, he was completely honest with himself. Out loud, he admitted he was a liar, that none of the pleasure he pursued did anything for him. He admitted that he was not strong like his mother or Musashi, that he was weak. In her final moments with her son, Osugi said that the first step toward becoming strong is to admit one's own weakness. Failure is never the end. For nobodies like Matahachi, their future is limitless. The past is the past. What you do now determines who you are today. Despite Musashi's more violent lifestyle, he found himself, in contrast to Matahachi, somewhat more frequently sharing in genuine moments with others. Takuan, Otsu, Jotaro, Kojiro, and Iori, to name a few. And it wasn't just moments of kindness with people, but he appreciated the small things in nature and took up hobbies such as carving Buddha sculptures. Buddhism, at its core, is a lifestyle dedicated to finding wholeness in oneself and their place in the universe. There was something inside of himself that could not completely ignore the softer parts of life. But why did Musashi prioritize violence over everything else? What could veer such a compassionate soul away from kinship? His brutal father only ever scolded him, and his mother wanted nothing to do with him. His father wanted the same thing as he, to be invincible under the sun. And yet, despite having the same goals, or perhaps because of it, they could not form a connection. This perhaps conditioned Musashi to not see the true value of love, and thus didn't consciously pursue it. That very goal of being the best, being the strongest, is what made men like Musashi and his father so distant from others. Matahachi was nothing but a shadow to him, a shallow comrade with whom he felt no true connection. But there was Otsu, a strange girl who never looked at him in fear like the others had. He could never understand her, why she was so unafraid, why she looked at him so kindly despite his violent, destructive actions at such a young age that made the rest of the village hate him. It wasn't until many years after his childhood that he began to understand what it was Otsu saw within him and how much she meant to him. But by then, it was too late. He couldn't possibly hold someone close with the hands of a killer. He couldn't let her into his life, only for her to end up lonely all over again when he would inevitably fall in battle. At least, that was how he felt. Before his duel with Inshun, the fear of whom he couldn't shake off no matter what, it was memories of Otsu that brought him comfort, so much so that he even fell asleep, postponing the duel by many hours. He hadn't realized it at the time, but the love he felt for her was his salvation from the hellscape of his mind, of his life. As I said before, Musashi is unconsciously drawn toward soft, peaceful things, and he was most drawn to them on the eves of battles he was incredibly anxious about, or after narrowly surviving them. For most of his life, up until he encountered Ine and Sekishusai, his father was always in the back of his mind, filling him with doubt, fear, and hatred. But after being humbled by the unexplainable, invincible feeling he felt from those old men, they took the place of his father in his mind. The irritation they brought him, the nagging question of why it was they seemed so unreachable. After meeting them, he realized that he and his violent father were nothing. The path of violence is nothing. But then, what is the path to fulfillment, if not to be undefeatable in combat? Ine and Seki Shusai had something neither of them did. It was in his low moments, his moments of reflection, moments of emptiness, where Musashi glanced the truth. I am nothing. Beneath the vastness of these starry heavens, I am insignificant. I fall into the ground. No, that's not it. The stars are just as high as they ever were. Defeat water? Water couldn't care less. I can easily grab a handful. It's at my mercy, and yet, it's still what it is. Free. Musashi already knew some of this back when he was a boy, living in the mountains, communing with nature, though he might not have been able to put these feelings into words back then. The fears that we face throughout our lives make us forget these things. The simplicity of existence, the infinite beauty of oneness with nature, with ourselves. When Musashi was older, he grounded himself back to those transcendent moments of his childhood by remembering a certain cave, and he even got to witness firsthand Iori forming a similar connection to a tree near his home, one he associated with his father. Ask yourself, what is your cave? For me, it's storytelling, daydreaming, remembering the feelings I got from my favorite stories when I was little. Grounding yourself in comforting memories is a wonderful way to help you face your pain, to find within yourself what you need to do to move on and heal. In my case, the lessons I've learned from all the stories I grew up with are what give me the strength to face reality. Fiction is beautiful in that it not only grants us time to take a break from the world, but also equipping us with lessons to overcome its hardships. We need only to listen. While it may be true that there are horrible things done to us that we could not have prevented, we should be careful about totally blaming others for our burdens. We made the choice to respond in the ways we did, to take the paths we took to cope with it. We also cannot entirely blame ourselves. After all, life is very hard and unfair, and we're all just trying to do the things we think are best, often with little to no guidance from those around us. And for those of us who are blessed enough to have people in our lives who are trying to help us, we don't always listen. Musashi was able to face his pain by peacefully practicing with the sword, navigating his mind, his past, his anxieties, with his skill. He discovered a flow state that helped him process things in a safe and accessible way for himself. Everyone's flow state is different, but try to find it. Try to find your core, your real self, and you'll see just how powerful, how infinite you truly are, even though you're so insignificant beneath the heavens. What Musashi eventually came to learn is that, despite everything, our mistakes, our loss, our trauma, our worth has not diminished in the eyes of the universe. We are still us. We are still all of the best parts of ourselves, the parts gifted to us at our very inception. Nothing in this physical world can or should define how we see ourselves. We absolutely should take responsibility for our wrongdoings and do what we can to undo the harm others have done unto us, but there's no rush. If we do what we can, if we know we are doing our best, then that is more than enough. We're stressed enough as is trying to fix things, so why do we put additional pressure on ourselves that doesn't need to be there? If the ultimate goal is to be at peace, why wait until all of our problems go away? Why not try to find peace right now? Don't expect to find it immediately, but know that it is there within you, only within you, waiting to be discovered. The irony is that we're anxious about not wanting to be anxious. It's probably impossible to completely get rid of anxiety, at least not while we're still in the physical world, but taking it easy on ourselves, treating ourselves like how we'd want others to treat us, and showing them kindness in turn, goes a long way in finding even a small part of that peace, that finality that we all strive for. Meditation, stillness, quiet, these are underrated. Sitting with nature, sitting in silence, is the highest form of learning there is. We are naturally so wise and know so much, we only need to slow down and dare to listen to our own souls, as often as we can spare the time. The voice in your head might sound hostile at first, but that is only because it has been begging, probably for many years, to be given your attention. I speak from experience when I say that if you learn to see your demons as your allies and not as enemies, the noise in your head will simmer. Even though I say all of this, the reality is that so many things in this world cannot be expressed with words. Some things cannot be explained. They must be experienced. There is no light for those who do not know darkness. Live on and endure the shadows, and brightness shall come your way.
It's the infinite beauty. It's the infinite beauty of oneness. It's the infinite beauty. It's the infinite beauty of oneness. It's alright, I know that it's alright. It's alright, I know that